close the door while I'm getting this up and running. Thank you. All right. So today, you guys requested to discuss copyright. As per usual, I am recording the lesson, so for anyone who is not here today, who's also interested, I am recording it. So there are a lot of different ways that things can be copyrighted, but we're going to talk about the main three that are going to be concerning to you guys as writers, because obviously that's probably what you're referring to, is how can I write something inspired by something else, or completely just stealing something from someone else and get away with it. So here's the answer. There are three different kinds of copyright. There's the first one that I like to affectionately call "Till Death Do Us Part." It's basically where they sign a contract saying, "Upon my death, even my descendants cannot claim it. It is now free reign." Don't though. I'm not encouraging murder as a result.
I wasn't thinking about that until now. So
just saying. My brain went. But yes, a great example of this is Wizard of Oz. Technically, he has plenty of descendants that could lay claim to the copyright if that had been in his contract. It is not in his contract. As a result, when he died, it became public domain, which is why we have things like Wicked, because of the fact that they went, sweet, and I'm going to jump on that fan fiction, because then the fan fiction is no longer considered fan fiction, it's considered retelling, which makes it legal and not copyright issue. When it's fan fiction is when it's still within copyright and you haven't gotten permission from the author, therefore you can't make actual money off of it, because otherwise you'll get in troubles. Then the second one is the 100-Year Law. This is a very common one for older works of fiction because of the fact that they didn't really understand like the idea that maybe, people could live longer or shorter, or that, descendants could take it on. They just kind of were just in general 100 years, and then we don't have the copyright anymore. And now publishing companies are realizing, oh wait, what if we want to keep continuing to make money off of that? 100 years doesn't feel like quite enough. So that's less of a thing nowadays, but it's more of a thing for older books. A great example of this was The Great Gatsby. We had this issue where as soon as it hit its 100-year birthday, a million fan fictions hit the shelves because people were like, "Oh my gosh, I wrote a fan of Great Gatsby," and they're like, "Darn, but it's still under copyright." And then they looked and they were like, "For 2 years, I'll just wait," and then they got it legally published as its own thing because it is no longer copyrighted. It is moved on. But like I said, generally anything later than 1930s is going to have a problem with that. It's not going to be the 100-Year Law. More than likely. Every once in a while you run into a rare one, but more than likely that's not going to be the case. Now, the most common one that happens is the one where it gets continuously passed on so long as they have descendants. If they don't have any more descendants, that's when it moves into public domain. A great example of this is Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is still technically owned by his great 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 grandchildren. So, as a result, it is going to just continue in perpetuity until they stop having children, pretty much. And so, you will always and forever, if you want to write something based on Lord of the Rings, need to be paying off his family. So that one's a little bit trickier, but ways that you can get away with a little bit of thievery. Full on plagiarism. I'm not encouraging plagiarism. Write your own unique work, but thievery. Pickpocketing, if you will. Yes, question?
There was a book that got published at Barnes and Noble, and it was like, is the shit called Dramamine, but it was allowed to get published because they like changed the name.
That's what I'm going to talk about first. So, that's actually, yes, that is actually a very common one where, because of the fact that it is in a different universe, the universe enough, or they say, like, this is them in the modern world, or this is them in a sci-fi alternate universe, or all these different other things. And so, A, they've changed the world enough that they don't need to worry about it, and B, they've changed the names. And that is another great example of this is Rey and Kylo Ren. There's a lot of people who ship them, I guess. Anyway, and so there is a book actually that is the whole premise was what if they were just normal people who lived in our world that is how Ali Hazelwood's first book came to be. She's now done a bunch of her own original work, but her first original work, quote unquote, was basically just Rey and Kylo Ren fan fiction, but what if they lived not in the Star Wars universe? And then she just changed their names. You can tell it's them. You even look at the front cover and it looks just freaking like them. But anyway, it's obviously just fan fiction with a little flair. But there's nothing wrong with that. You can get away with fully just stealing someone's character and being like, it's mine now, hee hee hee. You just have to, like I said, rename them and change the world or setting that they are in. If you do not change the world or setting enough, you could get in trouble. For example, if the Hermione fanfiction took place in Hogwarts, that would be a problem. But I'm assuming it doesn't. So, um, with that being said, though, changing the names as long as it's already in a different setting is able to get away with stealing someone's character whole cloth. We're talking about copyright today and how to avoid getting sued, but also steal. Not plagiarize, steal, pickpocket, if you will. Yes. Another great example of this is being able to steal bits and pieces, but then kind of you guys may or may not have run into this before, whether or not you like anime, it all depends. There is an anime called Muscles and Magic, and the whole premise is basically, what if Harry Potter but different? They even have not Quidditch, looks exactly like Quidditch, plays it on brooms, just Quidditch. Anyway, and then the main character definitely has a scar shape on his face in the shape of a lightning bolt. Definitely does. How did they get away? World and the magic system are entirely different, and the characters' names are also entirely different. They just make fun of those kinds of things like that because I like anime.
How much deep dive do you have to do in order to find this anime called Muscle Magic?
It's called Recommendeds from Friends. So yes, seriously though, it's actually really good. I actually really enjoy it. I would highly recommend it. It's a fun concept. The reason why it's called Muscles and Magic is because everyone in the world has magic except for this one kid, because pretty much if you don't have magic, they kill you. Hence why there's only one. He has decided that he is going to try and get through wizarding school only using his muscles. And he does. He literally can counterspell spells by just like anyway, it's dope, but it's dumb but dope. But anyway, and then like how he flies on a broom, he literally just kicks his legs so hard that he flies. It's dumb, but it's fun. So, but yes, so it's. But the reason they were able to get away with that, I literally every episode that I watch, I haven't even finished it yet. Every episode that I watch, I'm like, dude, that's just Harry Potter. How did they get away with this? The answer is the setting's different and the magic system is different. As a result, you technically cannot. For example, you cannot copyright how Dumbledore looks. The headmaster looks exactly like Dumbledore, 100%, but different name, so it's fine. They got away with it. And like I said, Quidditch looks exactly like Quidditch, but they don't have a seeker. They don't. And pretty much it's just the base game of Quidditch without like all the fancy, attack balls and whatnot. And so they just took all that out and just were like, yeah, 3 rings and like throw a ball through hoop, yay. And I'm like, that is just Quidditch, but okay. And then they just casually changed the animals for the different houses, but still called it the Ambition House and it's green. And but yeah, how they got away with it is the set and the name changes and all these different just subtle things that you got to be aware of if you're gonna try to get away with stuff like this. You've got to look up things like that. For example, Magic the Gathering, the card game. There's actually certain terms that if you use it in your own card game the exact same way that they use it, that is copyrighted and they can sue you. But if you use the same term differently and have a different definition for how the rules work, it's okay. And so they've copyrighted that word, but only in so much as it works the same. And so like you find the loopholes. There are some. Find them. I encourage finding loopholes. Look for them. In general, I would also say when in doubt, Google it. Because of the fact that there are lots of things that people don't even realize are copyrighted, especially when it comes to things like games. Like Wizards of the Coast, funnily enough, D&D, all that jazz, Magic the Gathering. A lot of that stuff is actually copyrighted, and so you have to be very careful. The only things that pretty much aren't copyrighted are elves and orcs and dwarfs. Every other race is pretty much copyrighted, um, because they technically invented it. And so as a result, they're like, this is ours. I actually had that problem when I was working with someone's novel where they were like, oh yeah, this is just a fantasy race. And I was like, no, 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 it's Wizards of the Coast's fantasy race. You can't use that. And can you make something similar and call it something different? 100%. You're good. But if you make the exact same thing that looks like a tiefling and then call it a tiefling, you're in trouble. So be careful. With that being said, with the Google, that's typically how you can find good loophole, is giving it a thorough Google. Exactly how much of this is copyrighted? To what extent is it copyrighted? Where exactly the line end? And that's where you can work in. Where does the line end and your story begin? You can totally just riff off of it. And like I said, you can absolutely have the characters look the same and even act the same as long as you change their names. So, um, but anyway, with that being said, you also want to make sure that you don't risk risking. For example, this is why a lot of books you don't use actual Google or don't use actual like things like that in their actual things. They use a different search engine that's a little more public domain friendly, or they'll call it like Google and they'll spell it wrong, because it's actually safer than being like, oh yes, Google is run by demons. That could be considered slander, unfortunately, even if it's a fantasy book, which is dumb, but it's so you either need to get permission from Google to claim that they're run by demons, hard to do, or alternatively, you need to spell Google wrong, and then everyone's like, ha, I because it's not. So do something like that. Have fun with it. I think those are fun when people do stuff like that, where it's like, oh, I could totally see that being a real thing, but then you get away with it. Like changes. Yes, question or comment.
So if there's like a character that's like eating Cheetos, is that not allowed because they can't like put the brand name in there?
Not necessarily that you can't put brand names in there. Brand names are fine. The issue is if you have something wrong with the brand name. Like if they're eating Cheetos and they find a frog in their Cheetos, that's a problem.
Okay.
So you can't have a problem with the product or with the company, and use a brand name because then it's considered slander. So yeah, but if they just do want to eat Cheetos or drink a Pepsi, you're fine. As long as they don't find a dead body in their Pepsi, we're good. I don't know, man. I'm just saying. It's like those no, exactly. It's like those murder mysteries where they're like going along eating a chicken sandwich and they find a finger bone. Ah! It is so again. No. But anyway, I mean, I would say there's plenty of material for soda to be able to be there because the amount of preservatives that are in there, they were able to actually prove that this one lady tried to sue mouse in my soda, and how they got out of it was the fact that they were like, guess what? If their soda would have completely decomposed and you wouldn't have been able to even taste it before it got there. And it's like, I don't like that proof. They were like, they physically can't because the soda would have just eaten it alive before it got to the shelf. And I'm like, ah. Oh, yes, it's highly acidic. So, but yes, fun facts that you didn't want to know. But yes, point being though is you can't claim things like that without getting into trouble in your novel because having issues with that. I mean, it's like, funnily enough, another anime trope is called isekai. It's basically where the person dies or has something bad happen or he just straight up gets killed and gets put in another world. The amount of isekais that have had giant like semi trucks run people over before they hold, yeah, so much so that Japan has officially said no, no more, done. And so they made it so that now, exactly, that why semi trucks, and so literally hurting the semi truck business. People don't want to drive semi trucks because they're like, I'm gonna murder someone. And so as a result, they were like, okay, now any isekais that are produced after this point cannot use a use something else, anything else, but you can't use a semi truck. I haven't, but it's on my list.
But this guy, instead of getting run over by a semi truck, it's like some magical like what's she carrying? You know how like in Cinderella they
oh yeah, yeah, carriage thing. Yes. other things that won't get you in trouble. You don't need to use the same thing as everyone else.
It was a purple semi-truck. It was a semi-truck. It was a full-on truck.
It was a truck carrying a bunch of Hot Wheels semi-trucks. Anyway, so yeah, you can do funny things, you can reference things, but just be careful with your referencings. All right, last thing that I'm going to talk about is retellings. When it comes to fairy tellings or myth retellings, make sure you are using the original source material. A lot of people are like, oh, I'll just use Disney. Disney changed, for example, Beauty and the Beast. And Hercules and Cinderella, everything has been changed drastically. So if you went, I'm going to rewrite this, you would be in trouble, good sir. So don't do that. For example, living furniture, not a thing in the original Beauty and the Beast. That's a Disney thing. They will get mad. So you gotta be careful with what toes you're stepping on. Make sure that you go to the original source material, and whatever myth or fairy tale you find the OG author, not a retelling, which I know it's hard to do sometimes. Some that have been retold so many times that it's actually easier to find retellings than it is to find the original. But I would highly encourage you to do your research and to find the source, because A, that makes it so you can make a more original story because you're going to the source. B, it makes it so that you don't step on any toes, because generally all myths are considered public domain for the most part. I don't think I've ever run it isn't considered that. All right, questions further about copyright and how to pickpocket things of other people's intellectual property and get away with it? Yes, Sable, then potentially Mabel, because you look like you might have thought
I
of that.
have one, but
That's okay. Think Sable first.
Yeah, so if I like, I don't know, maybe if I like wrote a song and put like Katniss Everdeen's name in it,
That's a great question, actually. I think you are okay referencing characters as long as, again, you're not slandering them. If you were saying Katniss Everdeen is like, I don't know, a horrible serial killer, then maybe don't do that. So, in general, you just don't want to run into slander. So yes, you can reference things like that, though. I know that there's lots of people that actually do stuff like that, in their songs where they'll be like, referencing, pop culture and whatnot. Nothing wrong with doing that as long as you aren't creating slander. Yes, did you come up with your question? Or are you still?
I think it's gonna come out really weird.
That's okay. That's okay. Referencing weird things.
Okay.
I've seen weird. We're good.
Yeah.
I like weird.
I don't know if I can explain it right.
Okay, shoot.
So if you're taking from the original, right? So you can
Yeah.
do a rewrite, and you can't do like a Disney Beauty and the Beast
No.
copy furniture, right? If
Yes.
I were to like rewrite from the original and then add on an idea that was like somebody else's rewrite, can I get in trouble because I was like it was accidental, but I still have the same thing as that?
That's a great question. You probably want to do some research first beforehand to avoid accidents like that. And generally be like, is there a retelling in which XYZ happens? So for example, with the living furniture, is there a retelling with living furniture in it? And then you'd be like, ah, Disney. Nope. Um, so I would generally say research it just to be safe. Because of the fact that people can attempt to sue you. Will they succeed if it truly is an accident? No. So don't be too afraid of it. If it's an accident, it's an accident. That happens. But if it's too close of an accident, you do risk potentially someone trying to prove that it's not an accident, and it's really hard to prove that something is an accident. It's easier to prove that it's not an accident than it is. And so as a result, I would say do your research beforehand to avoid accidents like that, but know that that just might happen. For example, speaking of Harry Potter, the author of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, was actually almost sued by someone. There was a British children's book author who wrote about a child who lived under the stairs who had magic named Harry Potter 10 years before Harry Potter existed. And so she tried to sue her. It was a complete accident. She was just like, I don't know, basement seems like a good place to keep a child if you're abusing them. Harry Potter's a common British name, and magic's cool. Like, it was a total accident, but it didn't seem like it because that's 3 out of the rest of the plot was not at all similar. But 3 out of 5 things in that children's book were the same. That feels kind of intentional. She was able to prove that it was in fact an accident and that she had no intention. She'd never run across this book. She'd never purchased this book. It was an accident. But again, it's incredibly hard to prove. They spent at least a year trying to prove it. So to avoid that, just generally research things. Just generally be like, so is this a thing that has been done before? And then if nothing pops up, you're okay. But yeah, you can unfortunately be sued for things you did on accident. So I would say be careful, but don't be paranoid, if that makes sense. Careful, but not like, everything is not real. Yeah, don't do that. Don't have a breakdown. Just do some basic Googling. Any other questions about copyright issues or other problems with copyright and running into that? No? Okay, cool. If you guys have any other further questions, feel free to let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to turn the video off. The upcoming contest is the Spring Fairy Tale Contest, speaking of which, fairy tale slash myth. Excuse me. With that one, it is due at the end of May, so you guys still have another 2 months to work on that. I would recommend using that time, but obviously if you like don't come up with an idea until 2 weeks before, that's fine too. I've definitely done that before, where I'm like, no ideas, and then the night before I'm like, I've been inspired, so that's fine. But if you can use the time, use the time. With that being said, the next one after that is going to be the summer contest, and as I've mentioned before, that can be any genre you want as long as it includes some part of the main plot being unveiling bones of any sort. Dragon, human, cicada, I don't care. Like, as long as there are bones involved and it is a pivotal part of the plot, we're good.
Bugs have bones?
Technically, they do. Exoskeletons. It is called the skeleton. I would count.
That's how they stand up, you know.
True, but anyway, but yeah, you can get as vague as you want on the definition of bones. I want creativity. Like, if you get to the point where it's like a guy named Bones buried in the backyard, I'm gonna be like, I'll take it. Like,
He still has bones.
he still has bones. His name is Bones. He's buried in the backyard. I think it's fun. So you just like have fun with it. Like, go nuts. Like, really, I want to see some unique stuff. Like, sure, if you want to just do a classic murder mystery with human bones, that's fine. But no, I will be awarding bonus points for very unique interpretations. So, with that being said, I'm going to turn the video off, and then we can discuss whatever else you want, or even not discuss. We can just write things if that's what you wish to do. Let me turn this off.